RuneScape has had a long history. Starting out in 2001, the game went on to become massively popular throughout the following years. In 2013, due to a popular request from the community, Jagex, the developer of RuneScape, decided to make a separate version of the game that would be the game as it was in 2007. This would go on to be known as Old School RuneScape. But because both games started off from the same point, sometimes it is only natural that one of the games decides to add something that the other game added. And so in this video, we will be looking at some of the updates from Old School RuneScape that RuneScape 3 decided to add as well. The first piece of content we'll talk about is the Inferno, or more specifically, Zuk. The Inferno was released in Old School RuneScape in 2017 and is probably the most iconic update ever added to the game. The Inferno is a harder version of the fight caves and challenges the player to survive 69 increasingly challenging waves, ultimately ending by taking out Zuk. Upon taking out this massive challenge, players would be rewarded with the Infernal Cape, which would take the place of the iconic Fire Cape as the best cape in the game. This content update was the ultimate challenge for Old School RuneScape players, and it took days for the first players to complete it and claim their Infernal Capes. To this day, it has remained as a very prestigious achievement for all players. So with that said, in 2021, RuneScape got a ton of updates during the Elder God Wars content arc. First, Jagex added Karapak, a dragonkin boss that represented the Elder God Chaz, followed by the Arch Glacor, an icy monster representing the Elder God Wen, then Croesus, an ancient fungal monster representing Big, and finally, in October of 2021, players were awaiting a boss to represent Ful, the Elder God of Fire, and players could not be more excited when Jagex dropped this teaser on Twitter.
Like all the others. You were expecting the Tok'ha.
It was clear that Old School's most iconic boss was making its way to RuneScape 3 as part of the Elder God Wars. Once the boss released, it quickly became obvious that there were a ton of similarities to Old School, but there were also some striking differences. Just like in Old School, players had to fight through waves of monsters to finally be able to take on Zuk at the end of it all. On top of this, he would also come with a new best in slot cape as a reward from the boss. However, for the most part, this is kind of where the comparisons fall apart. Unlike Old School, in RS3, Zuk was not designed to be the ultimate challenge that only had to be completed once to collect your cape. Instead, the choice was made to design it to be more repeatable and farmable content, which changed quite a few key aspects of this encounter. For example, instead of 69 waves, there would only be 17 waves, cutting down the total time for a single run. On top of this, Zuk would drop additional rare items that weren't a guaranteed drop like the capes. These would include things like the Magma Tempest ability, a book which would have the effect of taking more damage while also dealing more damage, and finally the new best in slot melee weapon. On top of this, to be more accessible, players would be able to get the new capes for each combat style by taking on the normal mode, and by taking out hard mode, they would be able to combine it into the ultimate cape. With all these changes, Zuk was not quite the ultimate prestigious challenge that some high-end players were hoping for, and some of those players would even go on to get those capes in just a few hours. But aside from this, it still holds its place in the game as one of the more challenging encounters that a lot of people will take on, as the capes are an amazing upgrade and they are untradeable, which encourages the players to try on the challenge that they otherwise might not have. It's also fun to point out that both versions of the boss came with an amazing soundtrack, and the RuneScape 3 version kind of paid an homage to the Old School one. Have a listen. In 2014, RuneScape added boss pets to the game. These were incredibly rare drops that could be obtained from defeating a boss, and essentially was a miniature version of that boss that could follow you around anywhere. This was such a beloved update that only a year later, RuneScape 3 developers decided to add it to RuneScape 3 as well. There are quite a few differences between boss pets between these games, however. In RuneScape 3, there is a threshold system, where each boss has a threshold at which point the boss pet becomes a little bit more common to get. For example, in RuneScape 3, the Chaos Elemental drops the pet at a rate of 1 in 2,500 kills. However, it also has a threshold of 500 KC, so if you don't have the pet by 500 KC, it now becomes 2 in 2,500. At 1000 KC, it becomes 3 in 2,500, and so on. This system acts as bad luck mitigation for the pet specifically, and has made it so a lot of people have the goal of obtaining all the pets in the game. In 2016, Old School RuneScape released an entire expansion to Clue Scrolls. The main highlight of this update was an entirely new tier of Clue Scroll, the Master Clue Scrolls. This would be a new, way higher tier Clue Scroll that would also come with a ton of new fun rewards. 2 years later, RuneScape 3 came up with its own Clue Scroll overhaul, and when they did, they decided to also add the new Master Clues as the main highlight, bringing a new exciting reward to all previous tiers, as Master Clues would be a new exciting reward obtained by completing lower tier Clue Scrolls. In RuneScape 3, Clue Scrolls drop some incredible items like dyes, which allow you to recolor all the best gear in the game, and as these are super rare and very desirable, Clue Scrolls are incredible GP per hour in RuneScape 3. And Master Clues were a step above all the other clues, bringing higher value loot, more items useful in invention, and better drop rates on the most desirable clue drops. In 2016, Old School RuneScape released a new update that would bring a completely new type of content to the game that RuneScape had never seen before, and that was Wintertodt, RuneScape's first skilling boss. This would be the first boss that players could take out using their skills, rather than using combat like any other traditional boss encounter. This would give skillers a similarly exciting and rewarding experience that combat enjoyers could partake in. Since then, the skilling boss has been a bit of a staple in OSRS, releasing every few years or so. Throughout the years, new skilling bosses made their way into the game, including Hespori, who did need combat to take out, but also required farming to take on, followed by Zolcano, a mining-focused skilling boss, and finally, Temperos, a skilling boss with a focus on fishing. Throughout all of this time of Old School getting skilling bosses added to their game, the RuneScape 3 skilling community would continuously request to get their own version of this concept added to their game. And years later, during the Elder God Wars saga, Jagex would finally give into these demands, releasing Croesus, RuneScape 3's first skilling boss. Croesus is a giant fungal monster that feeds on the corpses of other bosses that made their way into the Elder God Wars, including the Giant Mole, the Dagonoth Kings, the Crassian Leviathan, and Araxor. During the fight, players use fishing, mining, woodcutting, and hunter to weaken Croesus to finally take out its core at the center. And it quickly turned into one of the most lucrative skilling activities in the game, as it gave a ton of supplies, a new amazing magic armor set, and a book that could help you obtain clues. Let's talk about Dragon Slayer 2. Dragon Slayer 2 was a sequel to RuneScape's most iconic quest that was released in Old School RuneScape in 2018. The quest takes you all throughout Gielinor, but at some point during the quest you visit Ungale, an island where a blue undead dragon resides. This dragon is a quest boss and was one of the few quest bosses that can be repeatedly defeated upon completing the quest. Vorkath ended up being a pretty rewarding boss to take out for players, giving great loot to players who were able to take on the challenge. RuneScape 3 never got a sequel to Dragon Slayer, but in the past year, it did get a brand new skill, Necromancy, which is a new combat style all about raising the dead. Throughout this year, we've also been having a quest series that follows the evil plans of the necromancer Zamoregal. And when we followed him to the island of Ungale, we already knew what time it was. It was time for Vorkath to make his way to RuneScape 3. And that is where we are today. We are literally one day away from Vorkath being RuneScape 3's newest boss. In RuneScape 3, it's going to be a scalable boss encounter that you can take on both solo or in group. And it's going to drop a ton of useful rewards for both the new necromancy combat style and ranged. Beyond that, we don't know that much more, but we'll be jumping into it soon, and I'll make sure to cover this boss in a video down the line. Tomorrow, Vorkath will launch into the game, and we will be taking him on live on stream, so make sure to come swing by on Twitch, and if not, then why don't you check out this video on the right, where I go over the entire history of every time Jagex added a new skill to RuneScape.